Hello, my name is Anna Kolesnikov. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Parma, working on the Images, Body and Brain project, together with my colleagues Marta Calbi, Nunzio Languilli and Martina Montalti, under the supervision of Vittorio Gallese, Guerra and Alessandra Umiltà. I would like to thank SCSMI for organizing this virtual conference, in which I will be sharing for the first time our research on the implied gesture of the Audiovisual Image project. And I would like to use this wonderful opportunity to have your feedback. The great Sergei Eisenstein, more than any other filmmaker or theorist, conceptualized how film impacts the spectator on a physiological level, implementing his findings into his films. Following closely the advances in psychology and neurology of his time, Eisenstein fostered close friendships with scientists and even made plans for an experimental laboratory dedicated to research on how art affects human physiology. One of the biggest influences on Eisenstein's ideas on how to evoke strong emotional responses in the viewer was the great theater director Vsevolod Meyerhold, who applied the theories of objective psychology, specifically William James' theory of emotional resonance and Vladimir Bekleyev's theory of the associated motor reflex, to create a more effective acting method called biomechanics, which resulted in a totally new kinesthetic kind of theater during the Soviet avant-garde. In one of his early essays, Eisenstein wrote that the spectator reflexively repeats an actor's expressive movements in a weakened form, leading to incipient muscular tensions released in the spectator as the desired emotion. James' view of emotion, Eisenstein writes, here finds complete application. Indeed, Eisenstein later extended his notion of corporeal engagement to the filmic body as a whole in his theory of audiovisual correspondence through movement, or what he termed vertical montage. Claiming that music is closely related to human physiology, Eisenstein wrote that each of us is able to depict with a movement of our hand how a melody makes us feel, what he termed its gesture, and that this gesture must match the psychological states of the actors and overall theme of a film sequence. In his notion of the embodiment of the emotional theme in film, Eisenstein explains that in order to evoke the most heightened and complete form of aesthetic experience in the spectator, the physiology of the human body, its actions and emotions, must serve as the prototype for aesthetic composition. Eisenstein's corporeal account of film experience finds significant application in embodied simulation theory, which explains that to understand the actions, emotions, and sensations of the other, we must map the other onto self through a tacit simulation of the observed behaviors and bodily expressions. Advances in neuroscience and its growing convergence with film theory urge us to reassess Eisenstein's theoretical writings on motor resonance and the transmission of emotions from screen to spectator as an early attempt to weave a sensory motor account of film theory and to investigate the implied gesture of the audiovisual image. So, we've talked about how cinema moves us according to Eisenstein, but do we actually know that cinema moves us? From the very beginnings of cinema, the human body in motion has been a key point of interest. Thanks to research on embodied simulation in humans, it seems that action observation evokes tacit simulation in the perceiver, and this representation is how we understand motor events. What about camera movement? Katrin Hyman's most recent EEG study found that stronger motor resonance was evoked in clips filmed with a Steadicam than those filmed with a still or zooming camera, providing further empirical evidence that filmic means such as camera movements alone can modulate spectators' bodily engagement with film. And what about music and its sensory motor impact on the listener? A study by Chen and colleagues demonstrates that mid-premotor cortex was significantly engaged during naive passive perception in non-musicians. In 2009, it was demonstrated for the first time that non-human animals like parrots can spontaneously synchronize to a musical rhythm. Significantly, auditory brainstem neurons project to the reticular formation, which is involved in the generation of motor reflexes. It is conceivable that these projections contribute to the vitalizing effects of music, as well as to the not only human drive to move to music. Informed by the exegesis of Eisenstein's works, we aim to investigate whether there is a correlation between multimodal movement in the audiovisual image, sensory motor cortex activation, and emotional and physical involvement in the perceiver. To this aim, new stimuli were constructed in order to control for variables, and a collaboration of experts in filmmaking and music helped ensure that we adhere to a higher aesthetic standard. Specifically, we used the staircase scene from the classic Soviet film The Cranes Are Flying as a model.
Бел, так мы не договорились. Бел!
We chose this scene because Kalatozov, a student of Eisenstein, expressed the emotional theme of rising in all three aesthetic elements, actor, music, and camera, evoking viewer engagement through the highly expressive movement of the camera tracking the protagonist and accompanied by an equally dynamic soundtrack. The first step was the video validation. In order to achieve the complex camera movement in the scene, a DJI Phantom 4 Pro drone with a Sony Alpha 7S camera mounted on its platform was used. All stimuli were rendered in monochrome with a frame rate of 25 frames per second, with 250 frames in total. All stimuli had a cross dissolve of 25 frames at the beginning and end of the video, with frame 26 aligned with the moment the actor's hand was on the banister. Our aims were to investigate how camera movement, ascending, descending, or no movement, and actor presence, female, male, or no actor, affected participant ratings. Here are some examples of the stimuli. Our hypotheses for the video validation were that the Nun condition would have higher ratings for physical involvement because it would evoke identification with the drone itself and the sensation that one is ascending and descending smoothly through the space, and that the ascending conditions would have higher ratings for emotional and physical involvement due to a perception of greater effort needed to go up rather than to go down. Results show that contrary to our hypothesis, male and female were significantly more physically and emotionally involving than the Nun condition. Results also showed that ascending was not rated as more physically involving than descending, but confirming our hypothesis, ascending was perceived as evoking more movement and significantly more emotionally involving than descending. The next step was to create and validate our audio stimuli. The stimuli were constructed in close collaboration with the music composer Eduardo Andrade. The challenge was to compose 10-second long tracks that were controlled and ambiguous in emotional content, but still music. In collaboration with Joshua Bamford, note pattern was investigated in order to test Hansen and Heron's ecological theory of rotating sounds, which predicts that ternary note patterns, such as that of the waltz, evoke a greater sensation of rotation in the listener due to the interaction between note accent and perceived loudness. We also examined the effect of melodic complexity, low, medium, high, and melodic contour, ascending, descending, and flat, on participant ratings, in addition to note pattern, binary, ternary, and quaternary. Here are some examples of the stimuli. Ascending quaternary high, descending ternary high, and flat ternary high. Our hypotheses for the music validation were that, in line with Hansen and Huron's theory, ternary note pattern would have significantly greater ratings for perceived rotation. Ascending conditions would have significantly greater ratings for movement and emotional and physical involvement due to greater perceived exertion to reach higher pitches, according to the mimetic subvocalization hypothesis. And high complexity would have significantly greater ratings for movement and emotional and physical involvement. Results showed that high melodic complexity was significantly more physically involving than low complexity, and medium and high was significantly more emotionally involving than low. Contrary to our hypothesis, quaternary had the highest ratings for perceived rotation, with binary having the lowest. Interestingly, this pattern was mirrored in ratings for perceived movement. More studies are needed to investigate this result further. Finally, confirming our hypothesis, ascending was perceived as more physically and emotionally involving and perceived as having more movement than descending and flat, confirming the mimetic subvocalization hypothesis. Ascending was also perceived as having significantly more rotation and flat as having the least, suggesting that the perception of rotation is also modulated by contour. Further studies can shed light on this result. For the behavioral study, we then constructed audiovisual stimuli from the two validations. Specifically, we used quaternary low, medium, and high complexity melodies for the audio component and the ascending and still videos in female and male conditions for the video component. Stimuli were presented in either video, audio, or audiovisual modality in either still or moving form. We predicted that moving conditions will have higher ratings for movement, physical involvement, and emotional involvement with respect to still, and audiovisual conditions will have higher ratings with respect to only video and only audio. Results show that video and audiovisual modalities are modulated by still and moving conditions for movement and physical involvement ratings. Audio still is perceived as significantly more physically involving than video still and as having more movement than video still and audiovisual still. And thirdly, in contrast to our hypothesis, audio-only conditions are significantly more emotionally involving than video-only and audiovisual. The final step in this part of the project is the high-density EEG experiment, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, recordings have been postponed. The design will be a replication of the audiovisual behavioral study, and frequency analysis will be used to measure desynchronization and resynchronization of the mu rhythm in 6 to 8 electrodes from each hemisphere around C3 and C4 sites. It will be interesting to see whether moving conditions will evoke greater motor cortex activation with respect to still, and if audiovisual conditions evoke greater motor cortex activation with respect to video and audio conditions. In the next step of the project, we hope to investigate what occurs not only when human movement, camera movement, and the perceived motion of music occur simultaneously, but also in congruence or synchronicity with each other. Does embodied synchronicity evoke heightened audiovisual experience, as Eisenstein predicted? I would like to thank our team and collaborators for their vital contribution to this project. And thank you very much for your attention.